Hey folks, so today we're ready to start our hyper-realistic eye. In this video, I'm going to take you through steps 1 through step number 4 to start designing an eye that you can't tell whether it's a photograph or a pencil drawing. Don't forget, for today's drawing, you're going to need a piece of plain white paper. You're going to need a pencil, and I would try to choose one of these number 2 style pencils, not a mechanical pencil, and make sure that that pencil has an eraser. The final thing that you'll need today is a tissue or something to use to blend your drawing. So the first thing we have to do is we have to figure out the shape of the human eye, and it's actually a lot closer to the shape of the head of a small bird. So if you sort of think about a small bird while you're drawing, it'll make it a lot easier. So as I think about that, I'm going to think about it having a little bit of a neck, and that neck is going to work its way up and become the top of the head. And as I'm making the top of the bird's head or the top of our eye, I want to make sure that I'm filling the page here. Once I get about 2 or 3 inches from the side of the page, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to curl it back around a little bit. I'm going to curl around the bottom of that eye or that head, and then I'm actually going to loop it back out to the side. So when I say it looks like a neck, it really does look like a neck, but this is the outer corner of your eye, and if you would imagine, there would be some wrinkles in here. The next thing that we need to add would take the place of the bird's beak, and it's your tear duct, and it's going to happen right here on the inside corner of your eye. So you're going to go ahead and you're going to find that top line, and you're going to come right off that top line. When you get out close to the edge of your paper, you're going to give a smooth curve back in. Then you're just going to let it come on and attach back to that line that you had before. So you can really see what I'm saying about this looking like the head of a bird. Now we need to add the eyelid and the bottom eyelid. So we don't normally think about having a bottom eyelid, but it does. It comes from top and bottom. So I'm going to leave a little bit of space here, and I'm just going to mirror that curve that is the top edge. I'm going to drag it right here around the outside of that tear duct. And I know from looking at my eye that the bottom eyelid isn't quite as thick, or doesn't appear quite as thick as the top one. So as I follow along this curve here, I'm just going to stay a little bit closer. And then I'm going to go ahead and close it off there. I need to add the back corner of the eye, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to attach this top line to that line right there. So now it's beginning to look a little bit more like an eye, a little bit less like a bird. To top it off, we're going to need to add the iris, and the iris is actually 2 different parts. So we're going to start with the outer iris. That is the largest area of the colored part. And I'm going to start right up here at the top, and I'm going to sketch in a nice circle. And you can see one of the tricks I'm using for sketching a circle is I'm letting the circle be a little bit bigger than what I need. So it overlapped up here, and I can always just erase because I'm drawing nice and light. So now I have the outer iris, and this is the outer edge of the colored part of your eye. The next thing I'm actually going to put in is the pupil. So right in the middle of the iris is an opening, a hole in the middle of the eye, and it is called the pupil. So I'm going to put that in next. And that, too, is a nice circle. Again, we still look a lot like a bird. So we need to pull in that starburst effect that we get from the eye. And what you actually are seeing is the outer iris overlapping the edge of the inner iris. And it makes this like wiggly mountain-like line. So in between that smaller circle and that larger circle, you're going to add the edge of the inner iris. And you want to kind of smooth this out here. It should look almost like a fried egg. If we're going to stick with that idea of chickens and birds, put a fried egg right in the middle. But this becomes your outer iris. This becomes your inner iris. This is your pupil. This is your tear duct. You have your eyelids. And the last thing that we need is more of an artistic statement than it is a part of your eye. However, it tells us that your eye is smooth and wet here, and then maybe that you have some pores down here, and there's hair in the form of eyelashes above and below. So we want to show those textures as well, and to help us show that, we need to define a couple of highlights. Because by definition, a highlight is the lightest value on your drawing. So that means that these highlights can never have any pencil get in there. it needs to stay the white of the paper. So even if you put a little bit of pencil down and erase, it's still going to create a really light value of gray. So we need to define them right away in the beginning of the drawing so that we can make sure that we never get any pencil inside them, so that they're a true highlight. They truly are the lightest value on the page. And you are done with step. For step number 2 of this drawing, we want to start darkening up that pupil. So right away, it is important to make sure that those highlights are defined. And when I go to darken the pupil, I'm not going to press hard with my pencil. I'm going to create multiple layers of graphite that gradually get darker and darker and darker as I layer them. And one way that I can make sure that you're not seeing that I'm putting down layers of pencil is by varying the direction that I'm coloring with each different layer. So it's going to look something like this. Again, I'm going to make sure that I stay completely away from those highlights. But with a pretty light touch, I'm going to color going all one direction in this entire pupil. So you can actually kind of see that it's actually so light. When I get a little bit of overlap, I have a little bit of variance in the value. So I'm definitely not pressing hard, even though this is probably going to be the darkest area of my drawing. I'm just really focusing on making sure I'm coloring all in the same direction. And I just want to get those edges. Once I've given it one coating, if I zoom in here, you can really see those pencil lines. So the first thing that we're going to do to get rid of those pencil lines is I'm going to take my blender and I'm going to blend it. So I'm going to wrap my blender around my finger here, and that's going to make it a lot easier for me to control what I'm blending. So I just have that tissue wrapped around my finger. And I'm very gently just going to blend here. Again, staying away from those highlights. And I'm going to blend in everything I colored. Which definitely helps me to smooth it out. But again, I can still kind of see some variation. So now I'm going to add my second layer, only this time I want to make sure that I'm coloring in a second direction. And you can already see it is a considerably darker value than that first layer. And I'm not pressing any harder. I'm literally just giving it a second layer using the same pressure after I blended. The hardest part is staying all the same direction as you color in. It really does require some patience, but it is well worth the effort. Once I have that second layer, I'm going to repeat the process where I go ahead and I wrap that blender right around my finger. Once I have that blender wrapped around my finger, I'm just going to blend out those areas, doing my best to stay away from those highlights. As you can see, you're going to lose a little bit of highlight the more you work into the drawing. That's why we started with them like this. Finally, I'm going to give it one last coating again. So now I'm going to go back to another direction. And this time you almost can't see those lines as I'm coloring in. And you can definitely see how I get this nice smooth black right in there. So big difference from over here. So now we know to darken values using a pencil, you never ever press really hard. We're just going to go ahead and give it this nice coating. And then just like we did with the other two steps, once I've got that third coating on, that's when I can go ahead, go back to my tissue. And while I'm doing this, I'm trying to pay attention to where that graphite is, because I want to leave that graphite on my tissue. I don't want to save it. We're actually going to be using it here in just a second. So now I have that graphite, and I have this nice smooth dark value in the pupil. So now I'm done with the pupil. For step number 3, we're going to begin to work on our iris. That's the colored part of the eye. And the first part of the iris that we're going to start working on is this outer part of the iris. So keep your egg white right here around the pupil. Keep that inner iris, what looks like an egg white. Keep that white. But I'm going to take some of this graphite that I have on my tissue or my blender, and I'm actually going to move it out here. And this is going to create our first layer of texture and value. And when I need a little bit more, I can just go right there back to my pupil and go ahead and add a little more. And as I'm filling this in, I'm not going to be filling it in so that it makes a nice smooth fill. I want this to be like darker in some areas and lighter in others, but I do want it to be visible all the way around. If at any point during this blending you run out of graphite, you can always go back to your pupil and you can always give it another layer. The pupil is by far the darkest value in the entire drawing. So whenever you need to pick up a little bit of graphite, you can just find that darkest area, which for us is the pupil. You can give it another coating. And just remember that as you blend that coating, it's going to pick up that messy graphite down here. And then I can go ahead and you can see now I can move it out here to the side. But I want to stress that I'm not filling it in totally. So just enough so that I can see it and you can begin to see a little bit of a curve there. So just adding our first layer of texture there just on the outer iris. And that is step number 3. Coming back at you one more time, we're going to finish up with step number 4. And for step number 4, you are going to add your second layer of texture to the outer iris. So this time, I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to make very, very light lines. And these lines are going to work in a spoke-like pattern, 360 degrees all the way around my drawing. Pretty much anytime we're making marks, they're following this spoke-like pattern coming out from the pupil towards the end of the iris. So it's going to look something like this. I'm going to make sure I'm only working in the outer iris. And I'm beginning to pull some straight lines. And you notice that I'm leaving a couple of spaces. I want to make sure that I'm not creating this like perfect pattern, which happens really, really easily. And I'm also turning my paper as I'm drawing. That makes it a little bit easier to control and maintain that spoke-like pattern. But really most important is don't make this a nice even pattern. These should be broken up a little bit. Maybe there's areas where you have a lot of lines and then you skip a little area, maybe throw a line or two in there, and then continue this last set of texture until you get back to the beginning. And there is the end of step number 4.